I'm Sara, 17, Director of the Wheelock Society, and I'll be one of the interviewers this afternoon.
And I'm Catalina, Gorla, Dartmouth, and also one of the interviewers.
Would you like me to go do
like
the
to do
little
like a
introduction?
intro?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Sara Apgar, and I'm just honored to be up here today, proud T11. And my dad is actually Dartmouth, class of 1962. And I'm currently Director of New Stores and Facilities at Warby Parker, which is an eyewear company based in Manhattan that sells designer eyewear. Started online 5-6 years ago actually now, and moved quickly into bricks and mortar retail, so now has a blended retail model. And so I'm in charge of overseeing all of our planning, development, design, construction of our retail stores across the country and in Canada. And I'm also the founder and CEO of FitFighter, which is a company that designs fitness equipment inspired by firefighters. So we also sell products, equipment, and programming around the country to fire departments and training academies and gyms and performance centers. So that's a very small business I started 2 years ago that I hope to grow in the future.
Sounds great. So just as a little brief intro to the panel, you are all here clearly because we thought the topic would be interesting, but really it's a question that we picked up on as something that a lot of particularly students these days are asking, but that is really relevant for all of us at whatever stage that we're in and thinking about our work and our careers, whatever that might look like. So what is meaningful work? What does that look like? What does it mean to find it and to be looking to do something meaningful? Particularly in students, we're seeing a lot of uncertainty about how to think about and answer this question well and how to approach it. So just as some background statistics, 91% of millennials will stay in a job for an average of 3 years, which is below sort of the national average, which is somewhere around 4.5. Most will also leave their first job in less than a year. And the Ngram results from 1985 to 2005 actually reflect a change in our language, in that we went from thinking primarily about a secure career to now what people are talking about all the time is a fulfilling career. So there's clearly been a shift, and this question of what is meaningful work is becoming ever more present and ever more important in how we're thinking about our lives and our jobs. So that's really what we wanted to investigate today, is how are we thinking about that question, and maybe provide some good frameworks for what does it mean to think about that question well going forward.
One thing I just want to add to that, to tie it into the conference as well, is there's a tension right between meaningful work and being successful. And I think one of the things you'll hear as we explore Sara's story, with an unbelievable story across very many domains within life and career, is what does that tension between success and meaning really look like? So we're excited.
So we heard a little bit in your intro about all the really amazing things that you are doing and have been doing at different points in your careers, but let's take it back a little bit and start getting to know Sara as a person as well, and think a little bit about, first, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. Until I was about 10, and then we moved to the Baltimore suburbs, and I spent the rest of my childhood growing up in Baltimore, Maryland.
And you came to talk for graduate school, but where did you go to school for college before that?
So I did my undergraduate at Princeton, and one of the reasons for that was specifically because Princeton at the time was one of 2 Ivy League schools that I was looking at that had a formal Army ROTC program, which is how my military career got started. So that choice was largely due to the fact that there was that military connection there, which was unusual.
So you knew you wanted to be a part of the military from pretty early on, but what was a big part of inspiring that decision?
Yes, it's a loaded question, and a lot of people sort of say, imagine that 2001 happened and that I sort of nobly joined the service after that. And I will tell you that that is definitely not the case. When I joined the military and was thinking about it, is the late 90s, when a major conflict to which you might deploy was Bosnia. Humanitarian missions overseas were sort of the big cheese at the time. So I will not sit up here and sort of say that there was this, this kind of noble calling that I had necessarily, that I actually ended up, heavily sort of influenced my military career once I got into the Army. At the time in 1997-98, when I was going into college, the Army ROTC scholarship was a very compelling option for paying for school. So 2/3 of the tuition to a Princeton tuition was going to be paid for, and in return I would give 4 years of service to the military, which meant to me, really cool physical and leadership training. It meant job security after college. I wanted to spend most of my time playing rugby and, being an outdoor action leader, and sort of was, history major, and really wasn't one of those people who, from really early on, had some vision about what was going to happen when I graduated. And so I think that's sort of an important piece of this story, because, a lot of times I think there's an impression that there was this sort of like driven goal and vision, 20 years down the road, when I was a senior in high school, and that's just not the case. That being said, there were some really exciting, sort of compelling kind of roots of this professional choice of the military, public service, the idea of the leadership training and sort of what that would mean early in my professional career that drove me to consider that decision. Then the ROTC program gives you a full year to decide, once you're on scholarship, whether you want to continue with the program. And after a year, you can give the rest of the money back, no questions asked, and walk away. So it's actually a very sort of risk-free proposition, which I really applaud the military for, and think it's a great thing for young people who may be daunted by the idea of going into, ROTC when you're 18 and still trying to kind of figure it all out.
So you clearly decide to stick with it and finish out the program. As you are going through university, also being a part of the ROTC program, how is that different maybe from what some of your peers or classmates were experiencing in college, and how is that, how did you really think about that and approach that as you were living through it?
So do we have undergrads in the room, Dartmouth undergrads in the room? Obviously a couple. We have a few, okay. So you guys probably, Dartmouth is a lot like Princeton. Dartmouth has an ROTC program, it's really small. The training is in conjunction with, I believe, Norwich University up the road. And we have the same thing, really small program. And so really the kind of extent of most students' interaction at Princeton with the ROTC and with the military was seeing, some students that you knew kind of wandering down campus with their camouflage uniform on, carrying a rucksack on your way to, a training event. And so it was really sort of strange, I think, vision to see an undergraduate students doing this. And I think at Dartmouth it's similar. Not a lot of folks have a direct, immediate connection to the military, when they come here. And so the engagement was actually, a bit strange. I mean, you felt a little bit like a fish out of water to be, the one that was in uniform, kind of wandering down campus on your way to a training exercise. And so you really, for me, the camaraderie of that small group of people that were all doing that same, taking that same kind of course of study and that same professional interest, that engagement was really important. So that camaraderie, that I had with other RTC students, which numbered, about 20 at the time when I was in school, and I'm not sure what it is here, although I'd be interested. It was pretty foreign at the time. Again, especially in the late 90s. This was not something where there was a huge amount of recognition of what the military meant, how you would go into that, what the professional options are for young people. And so it was a little bit of a fish out of water feeling at the time.
Yeah. So you graduated from the ROTC program and then entered your 4 years of military service. What was that experience like?
So my 4 years was spent, so for those of you very quickly, the military actually has 16, the Army itself has 16 different branches. The Navy and Air Force are similar. So once you're in the, say in the Army as a service, you then have a choice to go into now combat arms for men and women. It was not a choice that I had at the time. That would be infantry or armor, which are kind of your classic foot soldier, armored tanks, type of divisions. You can be in combat service support, which is what I did. So units that then attach to combat arms units, such as engineers, such as medical service corps, So these are units that, attach in forward combat environments to support with, in our case, engineering equipment, construction capabilities, mining, obstacles, explosives, demolitions, and so forth. And then you can be in finance or quartermaster, which would be another sort of service support type of unit, which is really a little more behind the scenes, helping with documentation and sort of administrative support for the military. So you choose a branch when you're a senior in college. My choice was engineer corps. I wanted the opportunity to stand up in front of a platoon and be a platoon leader, to actually have, 35 men and women when I graduated from college who I would be leading in a combat environment. That's something I really wanted. So hence the choice of, a combat support unit like engineer corps as opposed to medical service or, an intelligence type role or a finance role or something of that sort. So I spent my 4 years with one deployment to Mosul, Iraq, which you probably hear a lot about now in a very different context with the discussion on ISIS. And so I was in northern Iraq with the 101st Airborne Division attached as a heavy engineering unit doing construction, demolitions, renovation support for, post-combat operations there. And then I spent the rest of my time back in Fort Carson, Colorado, supporting training activities and units stateside.
Pulling it back to the conference theme as well, and this idea of success and failure. What were ways in which you thought about success and failure entering into this experience that might have changed over the course of it, or how did your sort of reflections on whether or not you were successful or your community was successful, how were you really thinking about this question that we're thinking about as success and failure during your time?
Mm-hmm. Specifically in military context. So the most difficult thing for me about considering public service and the military, which I'm guessing if there are other folks who have been in this type of role, either in the service or in public service, or perhaps even in a teaching role, and there's a lot of roles I think that would be relevant to this discussion. The hardest thing for me was the fact that no matter what I believed politically, personally, about what we were doing, at a high level, from a foreign policy standpoint, from an engagement standpoint, from a war and peace, type standpoint, regardless of what we were doing, I was signing up to fill a role in which I would be required, by orders of the President of the United States, and therefore, my commanders and my unit, to fulfill a mission that I may or may not agree with personally. And that right there in and of itself, I think, is really the driver of then having to decide for yourself that no matter what, you believe, you've sort of signed up to be in a role where you have to define success as, number one, taking care of the people, to whom, who have been assigned to you in your unit. So taking care of your people and your soldiers who are doing a job which is a really important job, which is making life better for people in the environment where we were, especially as an engineer. So that was number one. Success for me was taking care of my people. Number two was fulfilling that sort of small unit mission that I was given. So if I was given a mission to, build an airfield, to do that as exceptionally as possible, that was probably going to involve destroying other things, destroying people's homes, destroying parts of towns. There were ways in which that could, for me, was extremely difficult. But I had to define success as achieving the mission that had been laid out for me, and be okay with perhaps a personal failure or a sort of tension, that comes with feeling like, I sort of failed in other ways, or, sort of hadn't achieved, or was doing something that I wouldn't have otherwise chosen to do. And then, I would say, thirdly, was to really be, carrying out, on this topic of meaningful work, making choices that were going to feel like, for me, they had had a big impact on the people and the environment around us. So, doing work for us, what that meant is, making life a little bit better, in our little piece of Mosul and the reconstruction effort that was happening. Again, when you step back up to 30,000 feet and consider even what's happening today, obviously, I sort of look back now on that experience and some of the work that we did, and you have to wonder, that's a difficult thing to then wonder, is at a macro level, what kind of change were you actually having long term, what kind of impact? And so really, I think for me, success was defined in these very small sort of bits and pieces and chunks of taking care of people, small unit mission success, and then really just leaving things a little bit better than when we arrived. The other thing that I'll note on failure in thinking about those three sort of bits of success that I was talking about is, failure for me, the biggest failure I had is that I lost one soldier in my platoon during that deployment when I was over there. He was 19 years old. He was one of my favorite soldiers. He was killed in a combat convoy environment, overseas under my watch, under my command. And so I had to go and visit his family in Washington State, afterwards, and visit the grave of a 19-year-old soldier. I obviously can't talk about this without, welling up 10 years later. That's the biggest failure. I have hanging, in my office at home now, the eulogy that I wrote and delivered at his funeral overseas when we were there in Iraq. And, I have to live with that forever, for the rest of my life. I wake up every day and I think about that soldier and his parents who lost, a 19-year-old, which is, now half my age. And so, I can't think of a bigger failure than that. And so when I think about, then considering what failure means sort of later in life, down the road, there never will be anything, I think, that I hope that will feel the way that felt. But what that also did was give me a baseline for, certainly the greatest failure that I've had, and it gives you an opportunity, I think, gain a little bit of perspective on what failure means, because I actually think that, most groups, I talk a lot, give a lot of sort of speaking engagements around the country, and, one of my biggest messages is always that I think that we, I think because we, in this type of environment, this type of room, Dartmouth, Tuck, Wheelock, are often really hard on ourselves, I think, thinking that we've failed, and, in ways that really are just scratching the surface of really what true failure means. And when you hear people sort of talk about, there's a lot of people in this room a lot more senior to me, and in their careers have probably had true failures, that in their lifetime. And so I think, especially in the context of young people and young professionals, I think that to keep a perspective on what true failure really means and how to manage it and learn from it, and then move forward from that optimistically, with a smile, and sort of recognize that for what it was. And kind of use those lessons going forward, and not, get bogged down in something that's really not, may not be sort of as much of a failure as it seems. So, just a few thoughts, on the topic of success and failure.
Okay. Do you have other questions on this subject, or should we move on and talk a little bit about some of the other things that you've done in your career since then as well? So, at the end of, was it 4 years, or were you in the military service for longer than before?
I stayed in for just about 4.5 years.
Okay.
And so at the time, I actually always imagined, I always wanted to be a company commander. Do we have any former military in this room? Just out of curiosity? A couple of folks? Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure if you had, longer career, was career military or, a shorter career. For me, I always imagined being a company commander, and that would have meant staying in for, 8 or 10 years and taking command of a company after I had been a platoon leader and an executive officer. But at the time, I had met my husband in the Army, and the deployment cycle was just really difficult. Home for 9 months, away for 15 months. And so got out, earlier than I expected. And that was actually in and of itself, ended up sort of floating around a little bit for a couple of years afterwards, because I really wasn't sure, what to do sort of after that time. One thing that's interesting about this discussion about meaningful work is that I almost feel like I experienced kind of 5 years later what a lot of young people I talk to now, who are juniors or seniors in college are experiencing at that time in their lives. I was sort of coming out of my first career, wondering what the heck I was going to do with my life after that. And so had to then, sort of have that same consideration that we're talking about now of, what's going to be the next kind of chapter of work that's going to feel the way that this amazing 5 years felt, that I spent my 20s in the military.
So it sounds like you left your military career earlier than you had planned.
Mm-hmm.
What else did you want to do? What made you want to leave? What did you want to pursue outside of the military?
Yeah. Yeah, I really, at the time, I really truly didn't know. I just knew that I couldn't sustain that lifestyle anymore. And so I think that was one of the things that was tough, is that I left with just a lot of super open-ended questions and wanting to just take some time to really think about it and be exposed to, a civilian lifestyle and a civilian world that I had no exposure to, with the exception of growing up and going to school and going to college. So we spent those next couple of years figuring that out, and moved to Europe, lived in Switzerland for a couple of years, ran outdoor education programs for high school students, was a ski bum for a little while, and took sort of that time to really think about that question.
So when you ended up settling into something after that, and what kind of answer did you come to at the end of those years that launched you on the next stage?
Yeah. Well, so interestingly, that was actually my first exposure to sort of this feeling that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was in that time after the military. So I started, so the first company that I started and only ran for really 3 years full-time was an outdoor education business developing programs for high school students, which I started in Colorado after I left the military, and then moved it to Switzerland when I had an opportunity to have a business partner over there who ran an international school. And so, and I just fell into it. And it was, interestingly, when I came to Tuck and first, zoomed over to Greg's office and sort of was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed saying I wanted to be an entrepreneur, this is because I'd had this experience being able to start a program just kind of on a whim. I mean, again, falling into it, not imagining that, it's something that would turn into a couple of years of really trying to kind of make it big in my first, business effort. So I really, explored, took a lot of time to explore while I was just putting one foot in front of the other, running those programs domestically, living internationally, and really asking the question of, is this something that could be lifelong? Could we really turn this into something big? Or do I want to just use this as a stepping stone to kind of see what's next? And that's what that ended up being. My husband decided he wanted to go to medical school back in the States, and so we decided to move back here and sort of close up shop, come to Tuck. He did his post-bac at Dartmouth while I was here at Tuck for 2 years, so that he could then attend medical school after. So that's kind of, how that first chapter, post-Army just fell into it.
So this sounds really important though, because this really is kind of, I know a little bit more of what happened after into now.
Yeah.
But it sounds like this opportunity that you fell into was a crucial opportunity of experience, sounds like experiential learning, but also exploring. Do you remember, can you reflect a little bit more about how did you fall into this? Do you remember just some of the details of what led you there?
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess when I got out of the military, I had sort of said, well, what do I love? why don't I just start there, you know? And so I loved, you know, sports, I loved the outdoors, I loved food, I loved physical training, you know, I loved my family. I sort of said, what are all these things that I really love? And so this, in Colorado, where we lived in Colorado Springs, there's a huge outdoor community. And there's a big industry in outdoor education out there. And so I sort of said, well, I loved the leadership opportunity I had in the Army. And it was very natural to me. I knew how to, you know, teach. I knew how to lead. I knew how to develop outdoor programs. And so I said, I'll put something that I love together with whatever training I've actually had, you know, professionally at the time, and the skill set that I've really had formal training on in the military. And I'll put those all together and sort of see what happens, you know, design a program that I think I could really, you know, make a really cool experience that's taking advantage of my environment and my skill set. And so started there, and then started by running programs in Colorado Springs. So ran a couple programs for high school students, ran some trips for adults, you know, some that were, you know, in the mountains in Colorado, snowshoeing, cross-country, hiking, backpacking type of experiences.
So you wanted more than a job?
So
you weren't just looking for a job in an ad in a posting online or in a paper?
Yeah, I guess I never really knew how to even start that. I mean, it's a funny thing to say, you know, but it's because the Army has a service. Yeah, it's a great point, Catalina, because I think the Army has a headhunting service that helps place junior officers into more standard middle management positions. For me, it wasn't even on my radar. It was like, that sounds totally uninteresting. You know? I was like, and so I just said, I didn't even really give that the time of day. And a lot of my friends were taking that approach, going to these headhunting interviews and putting on their first business suit. And for me, I just wanted nothing to do with that. And so I think the notion of creating your own work, for me early on, felt comfortable. Which is a really, interesting reflection that I'm not sure unless you just deliberately asked me, wouldn't have sort of highlighted that. It's kind of, again, felt like I fell into that because it felt right. It felt like something that was natural. And so, success and failure, you know, it succeeded in some ways in, right, that first year running those programs, but we only ever grew to a staff of 5 in that company, and we ran great programs in Switzerland, did it for 2 summers, and then decided I didn't feel like this was something I could imagine. I didn't have at the time what I felt like was a strategic ability to know kind of where to take that next and what I would do, and whether this was an industry that I could see success at scale. And so all of those things that felt daunting then, once I'd taken it to the certain level, were part of the reason why I said, okay, I'm gonna take a step back now. I'm really inspired. I've been out in the world. I know my husband has made this choice to go to medical school. Why don't I take a step and go to business school to try to gain some skill set that I hadn't, you know, that I knew I didn't have. So, but that's, it's an interesting question.
So where did Greg tell you when?
Skip my part.
Well, you said, so you took us, just to kind of rewind back, so you said you had to talk, you went right out of bushy tail to Greg, you want to learn to be an entrepreneur. What happened?
Well, he asked me, Greg asked me if I had an idea. And at the time, I had no idea. I just said I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Well, and then we talked about Cheryl Smith a little bit. That was my company, and sort of talked about that experience. At the time, I knew that was going to be, you know, something that was put on the back burner. But you know, we talked about what it meant to just the basics, what it meant to have an idea, and then take the idea to the next level. And at the time, I was kind of like, here I am at Tuck. I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and that's my plan, you know? And so so that was a great moment when it was almost like, you know, come back when you have something to talk about. And that was a great turning point for us. And then we just, I had a lot of then during Tuck, entrepreneurial experiences that involved knowing that I had to start with, you know, a big idea, and had some great successes and failures with those ideas throughout Tuck, and then obviously afterwards chose to join a company that was a small startup that At the time, I wanted to be in that entrepreneurial environment. And that's how sort of the Warby Parker experience was born, and where Fit Fighter came from too.
Wait, there's something in between here. You went to work for a company out of here, a nonprofit.
Yeah,
Let's talk about that part.
great. Love to talk about that part.
I
And
don't
in
want
fact,
to butt in, but let's keep it.
yeah. Well, in that part, I was wondering whether you would ask me about sort of leaving, sort of making choices and then sort of moving on, because that part involves me getting fired from my first job out of Tuck. Thanks so much, Greg. I'm really excited to talk about this. So successes and failures. So, which also is something that I think most people, don't experience and don't, and which shows that, again, failures, it's not been a yellow brick road. I think some people sort of hear my story and think, wow, there's sort of rose-colored goggles here, but this has not been, sort of an easy path all along. So after immediately following Tuck, I took a role starting a nonprofit organization with a Tuck graduate from the class of 1980. And it was working on child nutrition and health and wellness issues. So again, on this theme of what do I love, that has continued to be a theme throughout every professional choice I've made, which is very related to the meaningful work theme. So loved health and wellness, fitness, again, sports, food, nutrition. And so this Tuck graduate was starting a nonprofit to implement programs around the country that would address major issues in child nutrition and health and wellness and fitness, especially in the elementary education field. And so that felt like the perfect fit for me because I was on the ground, in the first, four-person nonprofit startup, and 3 of us were managing specific sort of vertical programs that we were going to implement around the country involving schools, involving after-school programs, involving, public education, food programs, things like that. So, and then we had, the CEO or director of the program was going to be this Tuck 80. And so we started, our first 6 months was raise funds, hit the ground running, design these programs, and I helped to design that program, the program that I was running, which related to free meals in public schools. And so we really designed a whole sort of program to implement for the first 6 months, and that started at Tuck as an independent study. So I had taken this job sort of as a continuation of work that I did here, which was really exciting work. I loved it. And then at the 6-month mark, interestingly, there was a big turn in the organization where a couple of people were brought in from the corporate sector, from Kraft Foods, from General Mills, so brought in to kind of layer on that corporate expertise that that's helpful for a lot of nonprofit organizations. It makes a lot of sense. But one of the individuals that was brought into the organizations ended up being with me sort of oil and water. So I had a vision for where this was going to go and how I was going to implement my program, and it was very different from what my new boss, because my boss had now gone from being Peter Dolan was the Tuck 80 who started this, former CEO of Bristol Myers Squibb. And so my new boss, we just didn't get along. And I was basically sort of sat down after 9 months of being with this organization and starting really helping to develop the strategy of where we were going to go with this, and basically deliver the message. I don't agree, we're going to take things in a different direction. This is my way or the highway in some respects. And so you got to put your head down and, take some new direction or take a hike. And so that was the message that was delivered to me at the time. So here I am, 9 months out of Tuck, thinking I found, dream job, independent study, developed this program, and basically being told, take a hike. Unless I was a person who was willing to just kind of, shut my mouth and sort of take a new course. So I obviously was not that kind of person. And so immediately, you know, I knew exactly what needed to happen at the time, and so I left very shortly after. You know, a couple months later, that organization really turned into, you know, ended up being sort of a subsidiary, it's the wrong word, sort of a sub-program of Tufts University. The program I was working on took much more of an academic research focus, so again, really different than what I'd expected. And so then I'm, you know, here I am, putting my husband through medical school, paying my TUF loans. I'm 9 months out of graduate school, I've never had a job except for being in the military, starting outdoor education programs, and then coming to Duck. And so now I'm like living on Long Island, which by the way I'd never been, and sort of kicking and screaming went down to Hofstra University Medical School with my husband. And so I really had to spend another one of those periods, like after the military, with another kind of introspective period of time. What the heck am I going to do next with myself? And that was a really rough summer. I fired in April, and so the next 6 months, you know, sort of May through October, really in a period of, well, a lot of tears, a lot of sort of we're self-destructing, you know, meltdowns. And a lot of finally, I think, asking questions in this next chapter of life, the same way I did after the military, but now sort of after Tuck, I've gained a skill set, I know I want to be an entrepreneur, don't necessarily have a big idea right now, so what am I going to do about it? So I had coffee with everybody who would give me 15 minutes of time. I mean, I probably, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just before we get there.
Yeah.
So I just think it's interesting what you said. You were describing how this new guy, you had this vision that you had been working on at TUC. This new guy comes in, you should know what he's talking about because he's, you know, corporate. And you were told, you know, play the game the way we want it or you're out. But so basically he had a different measure of success than you had brought in. Is that, but what's interesting is you said that that's not how you were, but in the military you had to, you didn't always agree, right, with the measures of success you were